Aloha, namaste. This is Alexis with Radha Home Yoga, and I'm here to bring you a forecast for the rest of 2020. So many of you have watched the one I did with the rest of September. It kind of went into early October, and now I'm going to do one for the rest of the year. There was just a lot of different transits that were happening in September specifically, and I really wanted to keep it, shorter than a few hours. So this is part two. And we're going to start with October 3rd. So I'm going to be doing a full moon report in just a couple days because we have a full moon coming up. But this is for the rest of 2020. And we're going to start with October 3rd because that's the day that Mars moves back into Pisces. So if you remember, Mars started retrograde motion at, what was the exact date of that? September 9th, and he's still been in his own sign of Aries. So now he's moving backwards into Pisces, where he's been before. So let me get that up so you can see that. And this is the chart, and it is for, let's see if the date can come up. Oh, I must have cut it off at the date, but this is for October 3rd, and it's in the evening of October 3rd, Pacific Standard Time. I drew the chart for the evening, so it could be October 4th in places that are later time zone. But we can see that Mars has just crossed over the Gandanta back into Pisces here. So this Gandanta point is the one between Revati in Pisces and Ashwini in Aries. And it's the final nakshatra, the 27th nakshatra, and the first nakshatra. So this is a really powerful Gandanta point. The nakshatra of Ashwini that it's coming from is where we're really initiating and starting something new. It's the twin horsemen who are, going off, riding in a direction and really beginning something. And Revati is where we are walking each other home. It's where Pushyan, the shepherd, is literally walking animals to final rest or final peace. And there's a really peaceful quality to this nakshatra. It's one of the more sattvic nakshatras where you really see a quality of inner peace happening. In the beginning of Pisces, there's a lightning flash of insight. In the first nakshatra, Purva Bhadrapada, the second one, we have to dive really deep and go into some of the darker places in order to really reconcile our spiritual understandings and really understand what we're experiencing more than just on a mental level and more than just on that sort of first hit that we get when we have our first spiritual transcendental experiences, and we have to really integrate it deeper. And when we get to Revati, we're really there. We're really at the point where we're walking through the door and we're finding that peace. So it's really an interesting shift to go from Ashwini into Revati, because we're going from that fiery initiation into a place of peace with the ruler of Aries, with Mars. And Mars, as we know, is not the most peaceful planet, right? Mars is a very fiery planet. It's a very active planet. It's the planet literally of action, of discipline, of courage. And when it's not feeling balanced, or when it's first getting that first courageous burst, it can be angry. So Mars, if you remember, was in Pisces, and then he traveled into his own sign of Aries. And just a week later or something, began retrograde motion. And we've discussed this in other videos, but for those of you just tuning in now, retrograde does not mean the planet's actually moving backwards. It means that from our perspective here on Earth, the planet appears to be moving backwards because it's slowed relative to the motion of the Earth. So while the Earth is revolving around the sun, all these other planets are also. And Mars is at a point where it's slowed to such a degree where it looks as though it's going backwards from our perspective on Earth. Because of course, all of astrology is based on our perspective here on Earth and what we're seeing. So Vedic astrology is attached to these stars, these fixed stars. And the nakshatras are made up of these stars. Sometimes, several of the stars put together, sometimes one of them, but that's basically how Vedic astrology works, is attached to to the fixed stars in the sidereal system. The tropical zodiac or the Western system is based on seasons and equinoxes and placing everything based on that. So it's a little bit less accurate when you're looking at the actual sky. So anyway, back to Mars in Pisces. The first time we had Mars in Pisces, we were coming in from Aquarius and coming into this place of spirituality with our planet of Mars. More than anything, the action probably started to take on some escape because because Pisces is where we really do tend to escape. It's where if you're in a very spiritual place and you have a very strong practice, you could get deeper with that. Mars could really be the spiritual warrior in Pisces and really show us and highlight our daily routines, our daily disciplines, and how those contribute to our spiritual growth. But when we are not super spiritual to begin with, or we do not have a very strong practice to begin with, even if we do have a lot of spiritual ideals, Mars in Pisces can be quite lazy. It can be where we really check out, tune out, maybe just watch movies or read these sort of esoteric books and get into this kind of place, but we don't do anything about it. And Mars is really a planet where we want to do something. So when Mars first stepped into Aries, it was like a burst of excitement that really came off as anger. And especially because there were several other fiery alignments at that time, Mars moved into Aries literally right as we had that new moon in Leo. So the sun just moved into Leo, Mars just moved into Aries, and Jupiter was still in its own sign of Sagittarius. So there was this really heavy fire quality of planets in very high dignity, very high intelligence with fire. So Mars moving into Aries to begin with felt fiery, rush, and maybe a little angry, kind of like this frustration of being in water, trying to be active and disciplined and murky, not murky, but like emotional, watery quality is hard. Mars has some struggle in it's debilitated in Cancer, which is another water sign. But in Pisces, there's a struggle. There's a very real struggle because it's trying to align with spirit and it's trying to align with higher principles and values. But activity is changed by the watery nature. It's not as direct and it's not as clear what the action is unless you are very aligned, very strong in your Mars already. If you have a very strong Mars in your chart, you'll be less swayed. And if you are somebody who is really aligned with not just the principles and ideals of your spiritual practice, but really doing the practice, really physically doing the work. So now that we've had this little stint with Mars in Aries, we've maybe been able to realign with our discipline a little, realign with our actions. And now going back into Pisces, what we find is Mars is in a different state. Mars is retrograde, and this retrograde quality is very internalized, which means that we're suddenly very acutely aware of where we're not disciplined, where we're not courageous, where we're not acting. We're questioning a lot of our actions. We're questioning a lot of what direction we go in. Maybe we just took off running when it was in Ashwini, and now we're kind of like, does that align with our bigger goal of walking each other home? Is this part of that peace that I hope to find? Or is this new direction going to take me in some crazy place and I'm not really going to feel that peace I want to feel? So this is a lot of what we're reckoning with right now. Are our actions aligned? Is our courage real and based in our true beliefs? Is our discipline legit? Like, are we disciplining ourselves in ways that are getting us closer to spirit? Or are we disciplining ourselves in ways that are just fundamentally about, weight loss or exercise or getting stronger? Are we trying to strengthen ourselves out of fear or out of a tamasic need? Or are we strengthening ourselves from a sattvic place, from a place where we want to raise up higher, closer to spirit? So that's really a big part of what Mars is doing here in this jump and this Gandanta point, this Aries Pisces alignment, and specifically this little jump back and forth over the Gandanta. There's a lot of a break whenever we cross a Gandanta point because there's no star leading us there. There's no energy that's guiding us there. We don't have a little, rainbow to ride on. We have just a big chasm we have to jump over. And that's really why these Gandanta points are so challenging. And with the nodes, as we've talked a lot about the Gandanta point with Ketu and the South Node going from Sagittarius to Scorpio. But first of all, the nodes are not planets. They're not actual physical bodies. They're calculated spaces, places where eclipses occur. So they're different than the planet Mars, which is a physical body that has a gravitational pull. Second of all, you know, there's a quality with this Gandanta point, with this Ashwini Revati Gandanta point, that is, it's bigger in the sense that it's the end and the beginning, but it's less, it's less like traumatic than the Mula Jaistha one, simply because Mula and Jaistha are harsher nakshatras. They're nakshatras that bring out some of the, you know, Jaistha is all about the rule and the order and the, you know, the quality of us in society and doing things right. And Mula is really about unruliness and chaos and just total destruction. Whereas Ashwini and Revati have higher qualities that are bringing us closer to our peace and our capacity to really live in this world in a way where we're taking action in a direction that is meaningful and important, and where we're reminding ourselves and remembering that the point of all of this is actually to come home to ourselves, to God, to one another, to connection. That's really the point of this. So we can get all fired up and we can get fired and we can get angry, and that's all well and good. But if we're not bringing ourselves home, then then our actions are not aligned, then they're not dharmic, and they're not bringing us closer to truth. And that's really what we're being reminded here. So this should be an interesting period of time. Mars will be retrograde until November 13th. So we'll really be like drilling this in, you know, and as a result, we won't have as much forward action in the external world. We might not feel as disciplined as usual. We might not feel as courageous as usual, or as forward action motivated. Not sure that's really a proper phrase, but we're not going to feel as much like our actions are happening and expressing themselves in the world because of the retrograde nature, and also because it's in Pisces. And there's a really dreamy quality here. So be careful not to get caught up in the addictive quality of that. Be careful not to get caught up in the escape quality of that, and really constantly bring it back to aligning your actions with your higher spiritual purpose. If you're not doing that, then it's not going to guide you there in the end. Mars is wonderful. It's a planet that really brings us towards everything through action. But if it's not aligned, Mars can bring us through some really poor actions, poor choices of action. So we need to make sure we're really tapping into what our truth is, what our spiritual reality is, and how our actions bring us to that and align with that. Very important. So that's one of the, you know, the big changes that we're going to see right off the bat as soon as October begins, and right after the full moon that we're going to be experiencing. So now I'm going to show us our next thing. Sorry, I'm working a little bit new here. I'm trying to do this so that I can share the actual charts instead of just explaining everything to people. But I'm not the most technologically sound person, so it takes a little bit more for me. So I appreciate your patience. Now, the next thing that we're going to see is on October 14th, we're going to see Mercury retrograde. So that's right here. And Mercury retrograde is, you know, it's kind of the one that always gets the flack for everything that goes wrong. People are like, oh, Mercury is retrograde, so this happened and this happened, this happened. More often than not, there's other planets also retrograde that are causing the distress that people attribute to Mercury. Jupiter and Saturn stayed retrograde for really long periods of time. And the last video was a lot about how Jupiter and Saturn are moving direct. As I film this, Saturn hasn't actually moved direct yet because I'm doing this before the end of the month. So we're still waiting for this Saturn to go direct at the moment, but I discussed it a lot in the last video, and also we'll discuss it in the full moon report. So I'm gonna not talk too much about that right now. But Mercury retrograde happening on the 14th of October is a big deal for a couple reasons. One of them is it's going to be retrograde until November 3rd. So obviously, if you live in the United States, you know that our election is November 3rd, and that is probably going to be an issue, considering we already have problems surrounding this. ballot issue, mail-in ballots. Because of COVID, more people are going to want to do mail-in ballots. There's been some issues with the post office and the post office not getting the funding it needs, and also having some, action take place where people were fired and sorting machines were taken out and all this kind of stuff. So there's already an issue with the post office, and we already know we're going to have more mail-in ballots than we've had previously due to COVID-19. So that's already set up for failure, right? We already have that notion that there's problems, and both presidential parties have discussed the issues that might come up around the election. So as a result, having Mercury retrograde at this time is going to be problematic, because one of the things that Mercury gets blamed for correctly is communication that's delayed, right? Mail that's delayed, very Mercury retrograde problem. It gets blamed for missed communication, lost communication, things that didn't happen. Like if you send a text or an email and it doesn't get received, or the person doesn't see it for some reason, they see it like months later and they think that you didn't respond. Those kind of things. That's why they really talk about not doing contracts, not making big choices at this time, because the communication around it can be very flawed. And that is a big issue when you have a huge election like this, and there's so much there's so much polarization already and so much blame and anger already, that the fact that there's going to definitely be some problems with the communication, which is ballots and voting, is going to be another issue. And there's going to be issues all around this. Now, it's stopping its retrograde on November 3rd, but we all know that retrograde, when it stops, is actually more like a stagnation. It's a stuck energy, and many of us might be feeling it at this moment that I'm filming this with Saturn right now, because it still hasn't moved forward. So all of our decisions and our commitments and our hard work is feeling stuck. This is what happens when a planet is moving from direct to retrograde or retrograde to direct. It's stationary, and that stationary quality can often feel even worse than the retrograde experience, because it's not internalized and we're not rethinking everything and questioning. We're stuck, and that stuck feeling can be really, really hard. So I can see that we'll probably be stuck in no choice, no decision, no answer as to who won the election for quite some time, not because of Mercury solely, but because the problem is going to happen when Mercury is retrograde. The problem is going to happen when Mercury is stationary, and it's going to continue for several days where there's no answer, and that no answer will build up resentment on both sides, and other alignments are going to cause problems there. So this is something to look out for. Mercury retrograde, October 14th. And if you're doing something like moving right now, which a lot of people are changing residence, and a lot of people recognize that they need to do it before or after the election, even if they are not really tuned into astrology, just making that choice on a logical basis. So you can imagine if you're moving right at this time, you're also going to have some issues. In miscommunications, you want to get things down written in writing. You want to make clear your contracts with people, anything involving money, anything like that. Try to tie it up now. Try to get that communication in order now. If you're going to be expecting serious, important communications to come through the mail or anything like that, expect the same delays. Expect this problem to reach into your life well beyond the election, especially if you don't live in America, then it's not an issue for you, the election. But just expect that anything you really need to get done contractually, try to take care of it now before we reach October 14th, really before we reach even a few days before October 14th. You want to have that in order, because at that point, it's going to be stationary before it goes retrograde, right? So the election, it's stationary direct, but right before it turns retrograde, you're going to have that same stuck motion as it slows to a stop. So be very super aware of that. The next thing that we're going to be dealing with, and you see we're already well into Rahu Ketu alignment at this point. This already happened September 19th and 20th. We saw Rahu Ketu move direction, right? So we're gearing up for this eclipse that's going to be happening. And there's going to be two eclipses. There'll be a full moon eclipse with the moon in Taurus, and then there'll be a second one with the sun and moon joined Ketu in Jayestha and Scorpio. And I'm going to talk about that one last. So now we have our next big thing that's going to be happening as we move forward. And remember, Mars will still be in Pisces retrograde, and Mercury will just be direct again when this next alignment happens, which is Jupiter in Capricorn. So we, and let me get this one up to share as well. Very happy that this has been working out. So Jupiter in Capricorn, we can see right over here, Jupiter's at 0000. So I caught it right when it was moving into Capricorn. And Jupiter it happened on November 19th. And this is, again, Pacific Standard Time, this chart. So it's really kind of September 20th, November 20th for most people in the world, because Pacific Standard Time is on the earlier end. We're, well, at this point, there'll be daylight savings time. So I don't know, I think we're -7 degrees GMT at that point. So Jupiter moving into Capricorn. Well, this is something I talked about a lot in the earlier part of 2020 because Jupiter moved into Capricorn when it was retrograde. And this was from about end of March to June when this happened. And we saw a lot of tightening of things. Everything started to constrict. That's what happens when Jupiter's in Capricorn. Things constrict. Everything gets very safety oriented. And by everything, I mean our beliefs, our ideals, our sense of expansion is in a constricted place. So it's hard to expand when things are constricted. When everything's fear-based, the choices we make are going to come from an ideology that is steeped in fear and steeped in survival and steeped in lack, not enough, especially when it comes to money and time. Not enough money, not enough time. Jupiter in Capricorn instills that belief system in you, where that's what we believe. Now, if you have a really powerful Jupiter in your chart, it will affect you, just like I talked about with Mars, it'll affect you differently because you naturally, innately understand Jupiterian energy. So you might feel annoyed by the fact that everything's becoming constricted. If you naturally tend towards a more fearful Jupiter, if you have Jupiter in Virgo or Capricorn yourself, you're going to feel more like at peace with this alignment. It's going to feel like, oh, finally the world is being as safe as I want it to be, you know, and it's not going to feel as jolting to you. So in your personal life, each of these things affect you differently based on your own chart. Also, what Jupiter rules for you, it will make a big difference. If Jupiter, if you're a Taurus rising and Jupiter's your 8th lord, it's going to be in the 9th house for you. So it's going to come around things like, higher teachings and wisdom, teachers and classes, being a student, and also things like, court documents and paperwork involving things that have to do with court rules and court orders and stuff like that. No matter what we look at though, Jupiter, and look, it's joining Saturn, right? Saturn's already been in his own sign. And since he's been retrograde, he's in the early degrees of Capricorn, and he just moving direct at the end of September here, September 28th, 29th, we're going to see Saturn forward moving. So Saturn's only at 3 degrees because he moves so slow, and Jupiter's going to come in and be directly joined Saturn. So this is adding to that constrictive, fearful feeling. Since Saturn's in his own sign and Jupiter is debilitated in his worst sign, you will see that more and more fear will rule the day. More and more rules, and Jupiter does have a lot to do with rules. It has a lot to do with things like, these governor orders, or I don't want to say laws, because none of these things are really laws that are being passed, but these orders that are being treated as laws. This kind of thing, the mandates, the way that society looks at right choices and right order in society. These kind of things, the rules, have a lot to do with Jupiter. Jupiter has to do with court cases and laws in that sense, both from like the judicial branch making choices and decisions, and also from the perspective of like what's legal. So I think that Jupiter in Capricorn, we already saw what happened. Everything really closed down. Everything kind of became fear-based. And I think that's going to continue. Now, to many people, they're like, well, that's great. That's really wonderful that that's going to happen. Yeah, I mean, depending on what you believe right now, that could be really what you want to see. You want to see more constriction. But remember, that constriction is also going to be on money. So it's not like, oh, everything's going to lock down and everything's going to be, you're not going to be allowed to do anything, but you're going to be getting bushels of money from the government, because that's cheap. Jupiter, Saturn in Capricorn, that's a quality of cheapness. That's a quality of miserliness. You're not going to see a lot of money. That's called penny pinching. That's, you know, this is not that. This is more fear. And when you see people stockpiling things and, you know, being worried and fearful, that's a Jupiter and Capricorn thing. And join Saturn, especially so. And join Saturn, we also see a lot more things like atheism and a lack of spiritual connection. So what then happens is we are not feeling faith in anything. We're not feeling like things are going to be okay and everything's going to be all right. We're feeling like things aren't going to be okay. Everything's not going to be all right. We're all going to die, which is obvious because one day we will all die. It's the only thing we really know for sure. But the fearfulness of the lack of longevity, you know, Capricorn has a lot to do with longevity and that kind of thing. Sorry, I had a little doorbell ring there. So Jupiter and Saturn together, I think I was talking about how there's a quality of atheism, a quality where we are not, let's see, are we not sharing the screen right now? Okay. Let's see. There's a quality where we're not as faith driven. We're not as willing to expand our beliefs to believe that everything will be okay. We are more in the mindset that everything will not be okay and that we need to preserve the long-term security and survival. And when we're survival based, when you're in that place of survival, that's really more related to your reptilian brain. That's more of the perspective of like, I have to act out of living or dying. And that's going to be fight or flight. And it's going to be like, this is the you know, whatever you believe is the right thing to do in that time. And it will vary from person to person, but what won't vary is that it's fear-based. So one person might believe that more mandates and more strict rules and everything is necessary to keep us all safe from coronavirus. Somebody else might believe that less of that is what's important and that what's really scary is businesses dying and that we need to do whatever we can to keep our rights. Either way, you'll see, you know, a metaphorical or a literal gun in the hand of like, this is life or death. What I believe is life or death. And that's the scary part, because the truth is there's way more variations of the way things could work out than what we imagine when we're in that fear-based place. In the fear-based place, it's fight or flight. You know, in the fear-based place, it's frozen and acting solely from whatever belief system you hold. But in an open, expansive place, you can imagine that there's lots of possibilities and lots of potentials, and the two being offered are not the only ones. But we live in a society that really has more of this Jupiter, Saturn, and Capricorn viewpoint, right? We live in a society that already is pretty fear-based and already driven to make us believe that if we don't, you know, if we don't constantly live in a state of survival and surviving, then we're going to not survive, you know, that it won't work. And so people work more hours than they need to. They spend their time fearing and fretfully, you know, biting their nails over all the would-be's and could-be's and things that could happen. And we buy security systems and we worry about our possessions and we worry about our money and we worry about you know, we worry a lot in our society. It's a very worrying society. So Jupiter and Saturn and Capricorn is validating that and saying, oh yeah, you have a lot to be worried about. You know, you are going to die and survival is the most important thing. And whatever you believe to be the right way to survive is going to be what's highlighted there. So it's actually an alignment that I'm personally not looking forward to and that I think is going to, I think already we saw a good example from March to June of a lot of fear-based ideology and a lot of removal from the higher spiritual qualities that we might have, where we don't really have that true connection. Everything sort of logically needs to be explained in this really practical way that is all about the long-term vision of survival. Excuse me. As opposed to really enjoying and surviving through a way that's more like thriving. Now, again, we have this Rahu Ketu situation here. And we see with Rahu and Taurus, we really have a high focus, or part of us that really wants to experience thriving, that really wants to experience joy and pleasure and, enjoyment of the experience of meeting our needs and surviving. We see that this is a time when our focus will be there, but it's a very frenetic focus. Rahu is not where things happen for us. Rahu's where we want things to happen, where we have almost an obsession that something is. So it doesn't mean we're all going to be really smart and intelligent with Taurus energy. It means we're going to be fixated on it and really wanting it and doing whatever we can to think we can get it. Maybe, for example, I'll use myself as an example, and I'm a Taurus rising, but Rahu was in Gemini, and that's my second house. So it's the house of values and all of that. When the pandemic first started, I was the one going to the garden store, and getting bags of dirt. And I bought a composter, and I really went out of my way to upgrade my plant life and my life of growing things, because that fed my fears of, what will happen. It's like, well, I want to be at least growing food, and I want to ground myself in that way because it feels good to me. Well, eventually I came to the idea that, that's all fine and dandy to do that in my house, and that's great that I can make that happen, but it's not really enough for me. Like, it's really just kind of a band-aid on the problem for me, and that I have a much bigger issue is that I want to move out of the city again, and I want to live back in an environment where I can really grow food, and not just like in pots on a patio, but really bring about a, not necessarily full food autonomy, but really allowing myself to feel comfort in knowing that I can walk outside and grab food to eat and take it in, and that I'm promoting my beliefs around how we should be living at one with nature, how we should be living in a way where we, take less and give more, and are really aware of the cycles of nature. We're aware that sun is where we're getting our power, and if there's not enough sun, we can't get more power, instead of this sort of way that we do things now, which is an awareness around things like solar energy, but also a desire to just take and take and take and take and take and always need more, and no idea of when we do something, no awareness around when we run our appliances, or when we have our lights on for too long and stuff like that. So I like to have awareness around those things and incorporate that into my life. I'm not full blown in that direction, but it's something that matters to me and that I want to know more about. So this is an example of a Rahu and Taurus kind of a thing, where you might go out and sort of get yourself a garden patio situation, but then realize that doesn't really meet your full needs, and then try something else. Or maybe you're not quite there yet, and what you're doing is trying to buy organic or trying to buy healthier food from farmers markets or something like that. And then, it becomes expensive and it's not reasonable, and then you need to try something else. Like, wherever you're at in this process, it's a quality of trial and error. That's really what Rahu does to us. It brings us a lot of trial and error and confusion. And so it's not like, oh, we're super smart with this energy and we're just going to make it happen. It's like we're not that smart with this energy, and we're sort of infantile, actually, and childish, and we just want to try and try and try and try and try, but we're not necessarily winning. So our obsession with comfort, our obsession with ease, and our obsession with making things, more earthy and more in tune with nature, and all of that is just that. It's an obsession. It's not a quality of success. It's also a focus on possessions and money and making sure we have enough money to buy things and stuff. So that's going to add to some of the tight energy around money that Jupiter in Capricorn brings, because Jupiter is a lot about generosity. And in Capricorn, it's hard to be generous because everything is survival based. So it's going to be more like need based. It's not that you won't share at all, but you would share with immediate friends and family, and you would only give what's needed. There'd be a lot of allotting and what's it called when you sort of, everybody gets their share of something and it's doled out as needed. I can't think of the word for that right now, but that's the kind of energy and attitude around that. So this is going to be one of the bigger things that actually happens. Jupiter stays in a sign for a year, and we're going to have a year of this really constricted belief systems. The problem too we see here is Rahu's in this fixed sign of Taurus, right? And it's a fixed sign that again likes ease and comfort and harmony. Getting along becomes more important. And with Jupiter, Saturn in this really constrictive place in Capricorn, survival becomes really important. So one of the things I really see happening is a lot more complacency. Mars in Pisces, Rahu in Taurus, Jupiter, Saturn in Capricorn, teaching us that the most important thing is living, surviving, not thriving, surviving. We're trying to thrive over here, but we're not always successful, but we're surviving. And that's what's most important. And our actions are sort of diluted and not as courageous. So this is something that we can see. And with Venus, Mercury right here in Libra, we want to get along. We really, really want to get along. We want to be agreeable. And in the history of Rahu Ketu in this Taurus Scorpio axis, we see that post 9/11, we entered into the Iraq war, and everyone was really agreeable about that. Oh, sure, there's weapons of mass destruction. Who cares that there's no evidence? Let's just agree. Let's agree and get behind the president and do what needs to be done. So this kind of agreeability might sound really nice to everyone. I mean, it does to me too. It sounds refreshing that maybe we can get along with our neighbors and maybe we can get along with each other instead of just fighting on the internet all the time. Certainly more of an obsession with actual physical Earth than, you know, the computers and the Facebook and this kind of world we've been living in, the algorithmic world we've been living in. You know, moving from documentaries like The Social Dilemma, which I think is one of the more important documentaries that's been out recently, to the one Kiss the Earth, which is like, okay, well, let's move away from our computer screens and let's start focusing on the earth and the ground. I think this is all very positive. The problem is when we become really agreeably focused and also survival focused, we're more likely to let things happen without using our critical thinking skills and coming from a fear, security, and also wanting to get along place. Those are ideally good things, but if we're living in a world that is as corrupt as the one we're in, which I mean, there's really no argument otherwise. There's no argument that we don't live in a corrupt world. It'd be very, very difficult to argue that. There's corruption all around us on all sides. So the powers that be have a tendency to take advantage of moments like this. People are fearful. And not that they know the astrology, but they can feel the energy. People are fearful, people are scared, and people want to get along. So what do? Well, we impose things on them that they might not otherwise accept. We tell them things that, and they just want to get along, and then they'll go with that. That has already been a theme that we've seen, but we've seen it really being railed against from all directions. Expect to see it more accepted and more complacency amongst people, like, oh, well, I don't want to die and I do want harmony with my neighbor. So sure, pass that Patriot Act that still hasn't been taken back since 9/11 and the Iraq war. We still have the Patriot Act. Everything that gets passed now will still be here in 20 years. Promise, guarantee. They're not going to give us back anything that they take. So they are the government, by the way, in case you're trying to, like, you know, wrap your head around they. The government does not just, you know, facilitate rules of and by the people. And of course, everyone knows that at this point, hopefully. The government has a lot of special interest groups that lobby them. Lobbying is very much legal and happens in our country every day of the week. So the majority of decisions that get made are heavily influenced by people who have a lot more power than you and I. And oftentimes they are large corporations. So one of the memes I just saw recently was the 3 branches of government: financial, petrochemical, and pharmaceutical. And it's really hard to argue otherwise. If you do argue otherwise, you don't have any facts to back it up, because that's really what our government is being controlled by: big moneyed interests. So when you think about complacency and you think about getting along and you think about security and survival, think how easy it is to manipulate people, or not even manipulate them at this point, but just tell them this is what needs to be done, and have people not have as much fight in them, not have as much desire to really rail up against it and fight. And that's a big potential in this coming time when Jupiter's in Capricorn and Rahu's in Taurus. You know, really seeking comfort and security and ease and allowing a lot of things to happen that we might not otherwise allow is the drawback of that. The plus is there's more comfort and ease. The plus is that you're more focused on the earth and less focused on the internet and information exchange and beliefs and all this kind of stuff. But the problem is that the practical earth signs do have some constrictive qualities to them, especially Capricorn. And Taurus does not as much, but again, the planet that's in Taurus is Rahu. It's not a planet, it's a node, and it's delusional, and it opens us up to just want to take and take and take and take everything in and try and error and try again and not really take advice and not really listen and just keep learning the hard way. So the quality that's there is not a super stable energy. It's considered exalted in Taurus because Taurus grounds it more, and we have less of an erratic tendency in the fixed earth sign of Taurus. But that doesn't change the fact that Rahu is Rahu, and whatever planets are transiting through there will also affect it quite a bit. So the next thing I'm going to show, and the last thing I'm going to show, is our eclipse December 14th. Because we are moving into the eclipse cycle, the first eclipses of the new cycle, so of the Rahu Ketu in Taurus Scorpio, is, you know, it's already in action, it's already happening as we speak, but it's also not really fully activated until the first eclipse cycle. So this one is December 14th. And, you know, I think it's at 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. Yeah, it's at like 8:17 a.m. Pacific time in the morning of the 14th of December. So 2 weeks earlier, there's going to be a full moon eclipse with the North Node here in the moon, exalted. Here we have the moon in its debilitated sign of Scorpio, although it's debilitated much earlier on. It's debilitated the very early degrees of Scorpio, and this is at the end of Scorpio, so it's moving away from debilitation. But obviously, you don't need to be an astrologer to see that there's a lot going on here, right? We have Venus, we have Ketu, we have Mercury, we have Sun, and we have Moon. Well, Venus is at the early degrees of Scorpio at this point, so she's an Anurata. And that's going to be a different energy and not as close to the eclipse signs or the eclipse planets. So the effect will be a little bit different and a little bit less intense with the Venus energy. And really what you'll see in your chart, I mean, I'm going to discuss it in terms of these different energies as they are, because there's no way to do it, you know, with everybody's individual chart. But the biggest thing for you will be, what do these planets rule? For me, Venus is my ruling planet, so it's going to affect me quite a lot. Same with somebody who's a Libra rising. But for everybody, Venus rules something different, and that's what's going to be affected. Now we also see Mercury here. Mercury is the planet of communication and information, and of course, all those things like emails and the voting ballots and all the stuff I talked about with Mercury retrograde. Well, that's going to be here in Scorpio also. And it's notable that Mercury is not in the best dignity in Scorpio. There tends to be a lot of emotionalism. There tends to be a tendency to control things, to make things as you want them. Again, Scorpio is a very fearful sign. It's where we literally face our fears. And when you see the Sun or Mars there, you see warrior spirit to fight our fears and to go in deep. The Sun will shine bright light on our fears and see the shadows and see that maybe it's just a little bug, it's not a dinosaur or a monster. There's a quality of lighting things up with the Sun, and that courageous ability to actually fight what's there, both the imagined and the unimagined fears, which is an inner fight in Scorpio because it's emotional, it's a feminine sign. Mars, it's its own sign, and it's also very courageous there. But Mars is not there. Mars is in Pisces. The Sun is there, which is great, but Mercury has this quality of using Scorpio energy to both seduce and control. There's a quality when someone has Mercury in Scorpio of being a little bit conniving as a result of fear. It's fear-based. I have all these fears. I'm going to lose you. A lot has to do with Scorpio, has to do a lot with 1 to 2 people, like a one-on-one relationship type thing where you're fearful you're going to lose that person. So what do? You say things to keep them. And you also can be very hurtful, like a scorpion. You can be stinging in your speech. Again, part of the controlling mechanism, and definitely coming from a place of fear. So this quality of Mercury being here is not necessarily a blessing. And you can see it's at 25 degrees. It's going to be very close. It's almost at 26 degrees. It's going to be very close to our moon, our sun, and our south node. Our south node is Ketu, It's 25 degrees also, so Mercury is pretty much exactly on it. And the sun and the moon are, by this calculation, 2859. I actually have them in 29 degrees, but 2859 is 1 second away from being 29 degrees on a different software that I have. But the sun and moon and Ketu and Mercury are all in the late degrees of Scorpio in the nakshatra of Jayistha. And Jayistha is, again, a very militant place. It's a place, it's called the eldest. So it represents the oldest of all of the 27 nakshatras, right across from Rohini, where the young maiden is the most beloved of all the nakshatras, of all the stars, by both her husband, the moon, and her father, Daksha. She's the one who's, so rosy red and young and fresh and beautiful and sensual and doesn't cause a lot of problems. Jayistha is like trying to hold the control, trying to keep the control. Somebody in a place of being the eldest, the one already in power in many ways, holding control. You can see that. You can see militants. You can see a lot of things. And we all know what's already, again, just like with the, with the Mercury retrograde and the mail-in ballots, we've already seen the stage set for this. We've already seen rhetoric around not accepting the results of the election. And with December 14th being not too long after November 3rd, considering we are almost definitely going to have a situation where we don't know who's elected president right away, we can see there being power struggles here, big time power struggles. We can see there being a lot of resentment. We can see there being a lot of tumult. This is right in the Gandanta point. It's the very end of Scorpio leading into Sagittarius, into Mula, chaos and destruction. So Ketu did the opposite. Ketu came from Mula into Jayistha, the south node. But then that's not a body. That's not a physical body. That's an eclipse point. And it's eclipsing the power of the sun. It's eclipsing the innate quality of wanting connection of the moon. Whenever Ketu and the moon are joined, we see a disconnect from our emotions. We see a lack of emotions, a quality where we are actually cutting ourselves away from the emotions and not wanting to experience them, actually suppressing them beneath the surface with anger and fire. So this is not a positive thing. I've talked a lot about how I see Scorpio in this. I mean, I see Ketu and Scorpio as being this sort of underwater, fiery quality, like a underwater volcano or something. I'm not sure what that's called, but when there's like a volcanic eruption underneath water or something. Well, this is that same quality, right? But it's in the eclipse and there's all these planets here, all this energy getting harnessed right in this spot. Now in your own life, this is a certain house. Scorpio is a certain house. If you don't know yet, you should get my report. It's a free report, Rahu in Taurus, Ketu in Scorpio for all 12 rising signs. You should know what house, what axis this is, because that's going to be almost more important than the signs. You should know where it is in your chart. And this is going to be where you find the explosion in this eclipse, is going to be that place in your chart. But on a world scale or on a global scale, we're going to see that this is going to be very, very challenging. And I don't know all of the specifics of everyone's stories in other countries, but in our country, coming right after the heels of a highly contested election where there's going to be no answer for several days on who is president, this is explosive. And it's in Scorpio. And there's a lot of fear, both real and imagined. There's a lot of strength with the sun there, but there's debilitation with the moon there, debilitation on the emotion. There's heavy control of information and communication with Mercury. There's Venus farther off. I mean, Venus is at 4 degrees. It's in a totally different nakshatra, but that's our sense of happiness and pleasure and our sense of relating and connecting. And it's also in the controlling sign of Scorpio, the controlling and overly emotional sign of Scorpio, really. So you can see some issues here. Scorpio also brings up things like shadowy topics. So the occult and sex and stuff like that is very Scorpio issues. Life and death in a transformative sense has a lot to do with Scorpio. So we'll see various stages that this will come up on. The sex trafficking and this kind of stuff, I'm sure will also come up. But again, Venus is a little bit out of the way here. It's not primary. This is what's happening. Mercury, Sun, Moon, and Ketu, all in the last few degrees, and specifically Sun and Moon in that Gandanta point of Jayista, where we see courage, we see a potential for great courage, for sure. Indra is the god of this nakshatra, Jayista, and he is the king of the gods, and he has a lot of courage and a lot of capacity to bring things into order. But he also has a lot of foibles and a lot of choices he makes that end up creating more chaos and destruction, and he needs to reel it back in or save the day to make amends for whatever he did wrong. So we can see there's going to be, and everyone could have their tale fit into this, right? Those who believe Trump is a savior could easily be like, well, that's, Trump's the savior. Maybe he makes some bad mistakes, but then he's going to save everybody. People who believe that, I don't know that anybody believes that like Biden is a savior or anything like that, but they believe that just getting Trump out will save us in some way. And there's a militance in that, bringing in a whole order, a whole group of people, because you're not really just voting for Biden, you're voting for the DNC, you're voting for the Democratic Party, you're voting for that agenda. So that's another thing that could come off and be sort of this, the eldest, the militants, the quality of that. I mean, we have two old men to begin with, so everybody's the eldest. But in one sense, Trump's the eldest because he's the one already in the seat of president. And in the other sense, there's the Biden is the vice president that was with Obama from the previous era, the era people might want to see in comfort and security. Those times were better times, that kind of idea. Both of those things hold that quality. And both of those entities, and I call them entities because they're really more than just themselves. Trump is unique in the way that he is sort of just himself, this sort of random wild dude. Biden is definitely not just himself, right? He's an establishment candidate with an establishment behind him. Both of these things are this eldest who want to hold power. They're both of these things are wanting to control and keep things in a certain way. And both of them might employ certain qualities of militants. So it doesn't, whatever your confirmation bias is, you're going to be like, oh, this is what that means. But it's both. It's that, and it's you in your own life and the ways in which, I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but people have generally taken on a more authoritarian tone as of late. Like individuals have become more like that quality. There's a commanding, demanding, yelling at people, barking at people. You're stupid if you don't believe what I believe. There's a lot of that authoritarianism steeped in society right now on an individual level. So even imagine that part of you coming out and being really militant and controlling and trying to make everything the way you want it to be because you are scared. That will also be. And of course, it's right here on this Gandanta point, and the sun and the moon and Mercury and Venus will all, the moon will immediately move into Mula right off the bat, chaos, right off the bat into that Gandanta point of chaos, because it's at 29 degrees during the eclipse. Bam, it's in Mula the next day, not the next day, like just a few hours later. I think I did this. It's at 8:17 a.m. So it will be just, hours later. And then the sun will be just days later, like a day later, I think. Mercury will take a little bit longer because it's at 25 degrees, but all of these will be moving into that Gandanta point on the other side in Mula, where we just saw Ketu for a long time. Very destructive, very chaotic, very whirlwindy. So this is the lining up of the military. This is the chaos that ensues afterwards. And it is going to play out like that. There is a quality of, I hesitate to call it revolution, because it's not revolution when it's so steeped in fear. When there's so much fear going on, we're not revolutionizing anything. There's nothing being revolved. It's a lot of fear. It's a lot of fixed energy between Scorpio and Taurus, and Jupiter and Saturn in Capricorn. It's fear. It's using the old paradigm to make it the way you want it to be. That's not revolutionary. That's same old, same old. That's just fearful aggression, and that's the paradigm that has ruled most of everyone alive's lives and centuries back. So that's not anything too new for anyone. The truth is, we live in a very authoritarian society, especially in the US. Everything is sort of authoritarianism, even what we think is not. So we are, whatever we're calling these different, this is socialism, this is this, even like Bernie Sanders would fit in a more authoritarian design than if you actually looked at what that difference is. So we're not actually in a free country or in a free society at all. And this is also a lot of hidden energy. Now, for the classic USA chart, we have a Sagittarius rising, and this is all happening in the 12th house of lies, secrets, hiding, escapism. Could be very evolved freedom, but it's not that. So this is all happening there. In my teacher, Sam Jeppy, did a recent video on the USA birth chart, and he put out the hypothesis, the idea that it could actually be a Scorpio rising. And he did a very good job of that. If you haven't seen it, you can look it up on his YouTube channel. So if that is the case, and we are Scorpio rising as our national rising sign, well, then we have Ketu right on our rising sign, disappearing us, literally disappearing this nation. And Ketu in the 12th house have a lot in common in that way. There's a quality of disappearance and murkiness and hidden quality, a very strong hidden quality. And then we also have all these planets there, right? This explosive energy happening right on our rising sign. So it really looks a lot like a civil war, right? Either a hidden civil war that we don't know is happening because we're pretending everything's okay, or a civil war that's literally just exploding and dividing our country on the spot. But it's not good. It's not the peace we want. It's not the peace we're seeking here in this Rahu and Taurus. It's a different energy altogether. And a lot of fear. Now, Mars is the ruler of all these planets, and he is in Pisces, and he is forward moving at this point. And this isn't bad dignity. There is a real quality of spiritual warriorism here. So there is another hope. And Ketu in Scorpio is also very powerful. There's a lot of spiritual potential here. And Sun is very powerful here. So we have some potential here. And I don't see this happening for the US at large, but I do see this happening to individuals who are raising themselves up and already in an elevated state in many ways. I do see this being a high potential for individuals to really raise their game, really take that courage to the next level and be spiritual warriors, and really have to move away from living out of fear. We're all going to feel fear at different times, but allowing our fear to be channeled in a different way, to be channeled in a way where we're physically doing things that are definitely aligned with our bigger vision. We're not sticking pins in things at every turn to, okay, I don't really like that, but I'm sticking a pin in it. I don't really like that, but I'm sticking a pin in it, which is a lot of what we do in our daily lives as individuals. We stick a lot of pins in things, and then later we wonder why nothing is the way we want it to be. Well, we got to take the pins out. We got to start facing with courage what we're doing and how our actions actually align. How do our daily actions align? Because a lot of people scream about climate change and yell about fires and do this, and then they really don't do much in their daily life to actually help the ecology of the earth. So I see a lot of anger from people. I don't see a lot of action. Very few people live anywhere near aligned with their belief systems, that they bark at others. And this is a big issue we have in our world. People don't discipline themselves. They discipline everyone else. Well, Mars in in Pisces actually gives us a real chance to discipline ourselves, because Pisces is a feminine sign, and it's more about our internal qualities and our emotional state and our spiritual connection to God and to Source. That's really what Mars is giving us the quality of courage for. So we have a chance to strengthen ourselves in that way, and we have a chance to discipline ourselves instead of everybody else. And that's very important. And then when Mars moves back into Aries, we'll be coming from a stronger place than we were the original push, because it's a second round, and we had a retrograde period where we were really able to think about it and really able to, marinate, if you will, on the level of connection between our actions and our beliefs. And that's really going to be important. So it's a stressful end of the year, no doubt, and a challenging eclipse. We had a challenging eclipse last year right on Christmas Day. This is going to be right before Christmas, 11 days before Christmas. So it won't have that same quality of, affecting the family dynamic of holidays and stuff like that. There's a little bit of remove from that, but it's really going to be, at least in the US, very much exploding around the election and the person in power and transfer of power or non-transfer of power or holding of power. And you can really see some issues that will arise. So it's a time to ground down into your chart, into your reality, into your thing, because you know what? You really can't do that much about that. You can vote, and your vote will either, be counted or not. But your vote, most states, really doesn't matter that much anyway, right? And I don't mean this to say don't vote. I think you should vote. But I'm just saying that in terms of how much that affects the world and your country and anything else, it's actually very little. There's a lot more you can do, and you should, especially if you're somebody who runs around yelling at everybody to vote. You should vote with your dollars. You should vote with, choosing not to support huge multinational corporations. And you should go out of your way to find what you're buying on Amazon and buy it at the store that it actually is sold at. That will make way more difference in this world than your vote in the November election will ever make. That's a fact. That's not up for conjecture. So you can, continue to just scream on social media, or you can actually put your hands in the earth. You can actually do something, plant something, grow something. Make friends with your neighbors if you haven't already. Make sure you're living somewhere where you want to live. Make sure you're grounding down into what your values are, and that you're also being a little bit, wise about saving money and stuff like that, because it could get hairy and things could get very, like I said, miserly and cheap. So if you're, right now getting unemployment or something like that, don't count on that as being your income. Start to make new plans that really are aligned for you and that really feel good to you, because ultimately what you want right now is to feel safe, secure, and good. And that is possible for each one of us. Each one of us could have a real revolution right now within ourselves. On a big scale, on the world global scale, it's also very possible. In our country, it seems like things are very divided, and there's too much dogmatism and too much closed-mindedness already for real revolutionary change to take hold right now. In this cycle, I see less of that being available to our country, but I do see it being very possible that as individuals we can meet that, and that maybe on the world stage we could see some real shifts. And the real revolution in many ways is not, it's not taking to the street with Molotov cocktails. It's making different choices in our world so that we don't live in the same world that we lived in before. Fighting the fight with the same energy as the person that you're opposing, or the party that you're opposing, or the world that you're opposing. Fighting the patriarchy with patriarchal values is really never going to get you anywhere. So we need to embrace a different way of looking at things, and really a feminine way of looking at things. One of the beautiful things about Rahu, Ketu, and Taurus, Scorpio is it's feminine energy. And it's where we can really embrace the part of us that feels, experiences, and emotes, and also that has tangible physical life force energy that we use in ways to grow and beautify and connect. Not this sort of masculine Gemini Sagittarius thoughts and beliefs and ideas and all this stuff that really lives in the ethers. It really doesn't actually exist. People shout all day on Facebook and maybe did not do a thing in their actual life. So that is a less tangible reality, and much more based on ideology and beliefs and opinions and information and all of this. We're now in a period of grounding, and the physical world, the water and the earth, are much more tangible and denser elements, and they bring us to our body, to our knees, to the ground, and they give us an opportunity to really just imagine things in a totally different way. So maybe the world is going bust, maybe our country is going bust, but we can still live in communities. We can still treat each other with kindness and respect. We can still exchange items instead of just always having money be involved. We can live in a different paradigm. And the more people that do that, that's a real revolution, because that literally changes. Then it's impenetrable by these random decisions and laws that get made by these powerful people that really don't hold our best interests in mind. There's no political party right now. I mean, that's not that there's no political party, but certainly neither of the two main political parties have anyone's best interest in mind. That's not their goal. And if you think it is, then you're really, really delusional, because they don't. They have corporate interests in mind, and they have getting elected in mind, and they have, an agenda in mind that's not related to you or I. There is no person, no politician trying to save anybody. The only person who ever expressed and actually showed with their actions that they actually cared about the human people on this planet and in this country was Bernie Sanders, and he's been ousted both times. He's the only person that anyone can make an argument for actually caring about us. Whether you like his policy choices or not is irrelevant. He actually gave a crap about us. Nobody else does, and there's really no evidence that they do. Maybe, you know, a couple younger senators or people who really don't have a lot of clout. But again, it's just these little people in these kind of random places. It's the overall entities and options that we have before us right now are given money by someone other than you. And as a result, they are beholden to that and not to you. And so you need to be beholden to you. And you need to be beholden to your neighbors and to your family and to your friends and to your values. You need to uphold your values. No one else is going to do it for you. You need to uphold your values. You need to stand strong in what you believe and what you want to physically do with those beliefs. So it needs to move out of the realm. And that's one thing I do like about Jupiter and Capricorn is there's a physical quality to it. There's a quality of doing something instead of just talking about your beliefs, physically doing something. And Capricorn has a lot of longevity. And so does Taurus. There's a quality of the long haul. And so you could make choices around your belief systems that help you physically in the long haul, securing land for yourself, buying property if you haven't done that already, buying property in a safe place, a place that might be, you know, away from the ocean's edge for when we all are underwater, you know, or making choices that involve self-sustaining things like solar energy, water catchment, and growing food. These are all sustaining you for the long haul. And they are coming from a fear-based perspective, but it's a very intelligent fear. It's a fear that is like, yeah, you know, we are going to enter a period of time where you're going to really want to have some self-sufficiency. You're not going to want to be reliant on government resources. You're not going to want to even be reliant on going to a store. So this is a time when you can really tap into that kind of fear that's very realistic and very practical, and you can save money. You know, you can make conscious choices around your money instead of spending it all over the place, which is another good thing about Jupiter and Capricorn, especially while Rahu's in Taurus, because Rahu might want you to buy all these pretty things, but Jupiter is going to be like, hey, you know, you need to save that money for your new solar system. So this is really where we're at and the rest of the year, and I hope this is helpful. Again, if you haven't already gotten the free report on Rahu in Taurus and Ketu in Scorpio for all 12 signs, you should definitely do that. Sign up for my website or for my newsletter on my website, www.radha, R-A-D-H-A, home, H-O-M-E, yoga.com, and you'll get that immediately sent to you. And I still haven't taken down Saturn and Capricorn for all 12 signs. I keep meaning to do it and I haven't done it yet. So if you're lucky enough to get this right off the bat, you might be able to get both of those reports and see where Saturn and Capricorn is for you and where Jupiter's moving in Capricorn. I will be doing a specific report on that, on Jupiter and Capricorn for all 12 signs, but that will be closer to November. So this is where we're at now, and I hope this is helpful, and I hope that you really make the choices in your own life to thrive, because we all do have that potential, and we really we don't need to subscribe to just the doomsday thing. Even if it seems like it's happening all around us, and it very well might, we have the option to make choices in our own life. We always do. And it doesn't mean that it's erasing the bigger problems, and it doesn't mean we're avoiding the bigger problems. It means that we have to be in a position to even take on anything. If you yourself are floundering and you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to be very hard for you to make an effective change in the world. And now that we're in this sort of grounded place where we want more earth energy, more practical energy, this is a great time for that. So I hope this is helpful. And again, if you haven't signed up for the website, please do. Please like and share this, or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Those are all ways to help me. I do these things for free so that I can offer this information to people, but it also really helps me a lot the more you spread it. And if you want to know where this stuff is happening in your own chart so you can really align with what's up for you, you can contact me for a reading. Have a beautiful day and have a blessed rest of this month, September, which is almost over. Namaste.